Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. It's Tanner Leeser, your host for The King in Giallo. This is episode 27 of the Forgotten Giallo film series, 1972, part 6, and I've got 4 more gialli here I'd like to highlight. As always, thanks in no small part to Troy Howard's book on Giallo cinema, So Deadly, So Perverse, 50 Years of Italian Giallo Films, Volume 1, 1963 to 1973. Like this video and subscribe to The King in Giallo. Click the notification bell icon so YouTube doesn't hide my new content from you, and if you enjoy what I do here, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. I have loads of exclusive content that can only be found there. On to the video. The first giallo we'll cover is The Terror with Cross Eyes, or Il terrore con gli occhi storti, an Italian-French co-production released on September 2nd, 1972. The film was directed by Stefano Vancina, credited under his better-known nickname, Steno, from a script he co-wrote with Giulio Scarnici and Raimondo Vianello. Music was composed by Guido and Maurizio De Angelis. The cast is led by Enrico Montesano as Mino Orlandi, Alighiero Noschese as Giacinto Puru, Francis Blanche as Commissario Pina, and Isabella Biagini as Mirella Trombetti. The lineup also features Lino Banfi in one of his earliest roles, Francesco Mulè, Umberto Rajo, and Luciano Rossi. The plot follows 3 dim-witted dreamers, Mino, Giacinto, and Mirella, who decide to stage a fake murder as a publicity stunt. Mirella plays the corpse, while her partners scatter clues in hopes of attracting police attention and newspaper headlines. But when a real woman is killed nearby, the trio suddenly looks guilty. With the police closing in and a very real cross-eyed killer on their trail, they realize their only way out is to solve the crime themselves. What follows is a broad parody of giallo conventions layered with other genre spoofs. The opening lampoons the world of spaghetti westerns, complete with a tyrannical Sergio Leone-style director. Soon the film pivots into a gleeful takedown of giallo tropes. Black-gloved killers, crazed staring eyes, chase sequences, only here they're pushed into slapstick territory. At one point, a getaway scene has Mino dutifully stopping at road signs while being pursued. The chaos builds to a finale inside the studios of RAI TV, where bodies keep piling up and the conspirators' fake crime collides with the real one. Steno directs with the practiced rhythm of a farce, and while not every gag lands, there's a steady pace of pratfalls, mugging, and absurd situations. Cinematographer Giuseppe Ruzzolini gives the film more polish than one might expect from such silliness, and the De Angelis brothers' score threads between jaunty and eerie, maintaining the spoof's balance. Still, the film wasn't without controversy. One gag in particular angered critics. When staging their fake murder, Mino scrawls "beak" on the wall in blood, only to be corrected that it should be "pig." This was a pointed reference to the bloody graffiti left behind during the Manson family murders, and many reviewers found it tasteless. L'Unità, the Communist Party's paper, condemned the film outright for the joke, while Corriere della Sera dismissed the humor in general, comparing Montesano and Noschese's act to the slapstick of Franco and Ciccio. The stars themselves, Montesano and Noschese, were popular comedians in Italy, often compared to, but never quite as iconic as, Franco and Ciccio. They worked together on several films in the early 70s before pursuing their own careers. Montesano would later enter politics while continuing his acting career. Noschese, celebrated for his uncanny voice impersonations, tragically took his own life in 1979 after a struggle with depression. Also notable here is a very young Lino Banfi, who would go on to become one of Italy's most beloved comic performers. As for Steno, he was already a veteran by this point. Born in Rome in 1915, he started out writing scripts in the late 30s before directing his first feature in 1950, photographed by none other than Mario Bava. Known primarily for comedy hits with stars like Totò and Alberto Sordi, he also dabbled in darker genres, directing the classic poliziesco Execution Squad, 1972, and the borderline giallo Double Murder, 1977. He passed away in 1988, but his legacy carried on through his son, Carlo Vancina, who would direct the surprise giallo hit Nothing Underneath, 1985. The Terror with Cross Eyes isn't essential giallo, but it's a fascinating offshoot. Part parody, part tribute, it reflects just how mainstream the genre had become by the early 70s, popular enough to be mocked in broad comedies. Uneven as it is, and sometimes even crass, it remains an interesting curiosity for giallo completionists and anyone curious about the genre's cultural footprint in Italy at the time. If nothing else, it proves that even giallo could take a pie in the face. The second giallo we'll cover is The Killer is on the Phone, L'assassino è al telefono, also known as Dernier Appel and Ein Mann geht aufs Ganze. This Italian-Belgian co-production was released on October 6, 1972. Directed by Alberto De Martino, the screenplay was written by Martino as well as Adriano Bolzoni, Renato Izzo, Lorenzo Manning, and Vincenzo Mannino. Music is composed by Silvio Cipriani. The cast is led by Anne Haywood as Eleanor Lorraine, Telly Savalas as Ranko Dresovic, Osvaldo Ruggieri as Thomas Brown, Giorgio Piazza as George, Rosella Folk as Margaret Vervoort, and Willeke van Amelroy as Dorothy. The plot follows Eleanor Lorraine, an actress who collapses with sudden amnesia while staying in Bruges. In an attempt to probe her subconscious, her husband authorizes sodium pentothal, and under its influence, Eleanor recalls having witnessed the murder of her former lover, memories she had repressed. This revelation sets a killer back on her trail, determined to silence her permanently. The premise has potential, but the script leans heavily on implausible twists. Eleanor's amnesia appears and vanishes on cue, and her attempts to test her relationships, such as sleeping with someone to check if they were past lovers, strain credibility. Gialli often thrive on contrivance, but here the devices feel lazy rather than audacious. De Martino's direction is slick but pedestrian, and while the production values are polished, the film rarely sparks. Aristide Massachesi photographs Bruges competently without the visual poetry he brought to What Have They Done to Solange, 1972. Silvio Cipriani contributes a respectable but forgettable score. The pacing drags, suspense scenes lack impact, and though the climax in an abandoned theater is solid, it arrives too late to redeem the film. Anne Haywood, once Golden Globe nominated for The Fox, 1967, walks through the role with visible disinterest. She had a brief stint in Italian exploitation before returning to American television, eventually retiring in the late 1980s. Telly Savalas is by far the most memorable presence, though his character, an international hitman, comes off as clumsy and underwritten. Born in Long Island in 1922 as Aristoteles Savalas, he had already earned an Academy Award nomination for Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962, shaved his head for The Greatest Story Ever Told, 1965, played Blofeld in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, 1969, and starred in The Dirty Dozen, 1967. Around this time, he was also appearing in European productions such as Horror Express, 1972, and Mario Bava's Lisa and the Devil, 1973. Within a year, he would land the role that defined his career, Lieutenant Theo Kojak in The Marcus Nelson Murders, 1973, and the subsequent Kojak TV series, which earned him 2 Golden Globes and an Emmy. He reprised Kojak in several TV movies in the late 80s and early 90s before passing away in 1994. This remains his only giallo performance. De Martino was always a professional craftsman, able to deliver a market-ready product, but rarely a visionary. The Killer is on the Phone is emblematic of that approach. A competent thriller without the boldness or madness that makes the best gialli unforgettable. The Killer is on the Phone has value as a curiosity, especially for the sight of Kojak himself, Telly Savalas, wandering through the foggy canals of Bruges. But stacked against the bolder gialli of 1972, like Fulci's Don't Torture a Duckling, or Miraglia's The Red Queen Kills 7 Times, it comes off tame. For completionists, it's worth the watch. For casual viewers, it's one of those gialli that proves that efficiency and professionalism alone can't replace style, audacity, or genuine suspense. The third giallo we'll discuss is I due gattoni a 9 code e mezza ad Amsterdam, translated as The Two Big Cats with 9.5 Tails, in Amsterdam. This Italian production was released on October 27, 1972. It was directed by Osvaldo Civarani, working under his own name, who also wrote the screenplay. The music is composed by Ubaldo Contineo. The cast features the famous comic duo Franco Franchi as Franco and Ciccio Ingrassia as Ciccio, with Luciano Pigozzi in a villainous turn as the killer, Luigi Bonos as Big Bon, and Umberto Dorsi as the bumbling policeman. The plot follows Franco and Ciccio, who are hired to take incriminating photographs of suspected drug dealers. Their assignment leads them to Amsterdam, where they stumble into a plot involving a jewel smuggling ring tied to a mysterious fakir. When the hapless pair accidentally capture a real murder on film, they find themselves caught up in a tangled caper of crime, deception, and slapstick chaos. Naturally, they rely on their usual bumbling instincts to try and identify the killer. This was not the first comic giallo ever made, but it was the first to openly riff on the title of a Dario Argento film, specifically The Cat O' Nine Tails, 1971. Any similarities to Argento's work end there, however, as the story leans more towards satirizing hippie counterculture than the giallo formula itself. There are faint echoes of Antonioni's Blow Up, 1966, in the photographic evidence angle, but even that is played broadly for laughs. The film's main attraction is entirely dependent on one's tolerance for Franco and Ciccio. Hugely popular in Italy throughout the 1960s and 70s, they were a cultural phenomenon akin to Abbott and Costello or Laurel and Hardy, with Franco as the manic, bug-eyed clown and Ciccio as his exasperated straight man. Together, they appeared in more than 100 films, parodying whatever genre was in fashion. Westerns, spy movies, sword and sandal epics, war films, and eventually, gialli. While their films were often domestic box office hits, very few gained traction internationally, as their particular brand of loud, physical comedy didn't translate well abroad. Franco died in 1992, while Ciccio continued working until his death in 2003, even making a late career appearance in the meta-giallo Fatal Frames, 1996. As for the film itself, The Two Big Cats is typical Franco and Ciccio fare, fast-paced, shrill, and full of mugging. It's lighthearted and cartoonish, and though the giallo trappings are there in title and premise, the suspense elements are negligible. One of the best gags actually pokes fun at the convolutions of the genre, an extended explanation scene in which all the twists are laid out to the heroes, who still don't understand a word of it, mirroring the audience's own confusion. The director, Osvaldo Civarani, was born in 1917 and began his career as a still photographer, even working on Visconti's Ossessione, 1943. He later became a cinematographer before turning to directing in the early 1960s, ultimately working across a wide variety of genres. Right around the same time as this film, Civarani directed a more straightforward giallo in Holland, The Devil Has Seven Faces, 1971, which also has Luciano Pigozzi. His reputation was never that of a visionary, but rather of a reliable craftsman, efficient, versatile, and unpretentious. He died in 2008. In the end, The Two Big Cats is best appreciated as a snapshot of Italian popular comedy colliding with the giallo craze of the early 70s. It isn't suspenseful, it isn't scary, and it certainly doesn't hold up as a mystery. But as a cultural artifact, it's an amusing curiosity, capturing two of Italy's most beloved clowns poking fun at one of Italy's most stylish genres. The fourth and final giallo film for this episode is Love and Death in the Garden of the Gods, also known by its original title as Amore e morte nel giardino degli. This is an Italian production released on December 4th, 1972. The film was written and directed by Sauro Scavolini from a story by Anna Maria Gelli. Music is composed by Giancarlo Chiarameo. The cast features Erika Blanc as Azzurra, Peter Lee Lawrence as Manfredi, Orchidia De Santis as Viola, Ezio Marano as Martin, Vittorio Dosset as the villa's caretaker, Franz von Treuberg as the ornithologist, and Rosario Borelli, credited as Richard Melville, as Timothy. The plot follows an ornithologist who rents a secluded villa, nicknamed the Garden of the Gods, to study birds. While settling in, he discovers a cache of reel-to-reel tapes left by the previous occupants. As he listens, a fractured story emerges: the dangerous, intimate bond between siblings Azzurra and Manfredi, the uneasy arrival of Viola, who becomes entangled in their lives, and a chain of betrayals and jealousies that drift from confession to catastrophe. The film toggles between the present-day listener and these recorded voices, slowly assembling a mosaic of desire, guilt, and decay, until the estate yields its final waterlogged secret. Where many 1972 gialli chased set-piece killings and clockwork twists, Love and Death in the Garden of the Gods chooses elliptical, psychological storytelling. Sauro Scavolini builds the narrative almost entirely through tape-driven flashbacks, giving the film a confessional intimacy and a drifting, memory-like structure. The director's brother, cinematographer Romano Scavolini's camera favors soft daylight, shadowed interiors, and patient compositions, often letting conversations and glances play out in long, unbroken shots. A few sequences, most notably Azzurra's bathtub confession, tinted with suggestive reds, tip into dreamlike, symbolic territory. Chiarameo's melancholic score underscores the low simmer of guilt and fatalism rather than chasing shock. The result is a gothic psychological chamberpiece, less about black gloves and more about the moral rot that curdles behind locked doors. Production-wise, the film leans hard into seclusion and interiority, a practical and aesthetic choice. The villa setting, limited cast, and confessional structure keep the scope contained and the mood hushed. That restraint also shaped the film's fortunes. In 1972's crowded Giallo marketplace, this kind of slow-burn, voice-driven psychodrama didn't have the export-friendly flash of the Argento-inspired thrillers dominating screens. As a result, international exposure was limited, and for years, the film circulated as a deep-cut curio, known only to collectors and devotees of Italian psychodrama. More recently, it's drawn quiet reappraisal from fans who champion gothic mood, elliptical plotting, and character pathology over body counts, often shelving it alongside kindred, slow-burn psychological efforts like Devil in the Brain, 1972, rather than the more sensational entries of the period. The performances are calibrated to the material. Erika Blanc gives Azzurra brittle elegance and sudden volatility. Blanc was a fixture of Italian genre cinema, appearing in gialli such as The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, 1971, and The Red-Headed Corpse, 1972, and here she brings that seasoned intensity. Peter Lee Lawrence, best known for spaghetti westerns, plays Manfredi with cool entitlement shading into tragedy. This stands among his final notable roles before his untimely death in 1974. Orchidia De Santis' Viola balances warmth with wary intelligence. By 1972, she had already logged multiple genre turns, including The Weekend Murders and Your Sweet Body to Kill, both 1970, as well as Devil in the Brain and 7 Murders for Scotland Yard, both 1972, making her a familiar presence in Giallo-adjacent territory. Ezio Marano as Martin, seen in the Giallo The Black Belly of the Tarantula, and Vittorio Dosset, the caretaker, add weathered gravitas, while Franz von Treuberg and Rosario Borelli, billed as Richard Melville, round out the film's tight-circled ensemble. As for the filmmakers, Sauro Scavolini was primarily active as a screenwriter in the early 1970s. This film represents his sole directorial venture into the giallo space, and, so far as stable records reflect, his final credited work in the genre. He's also credited as the writer on several gialli, including The Double, 1972, among numerous early 70s giallo films directed by Sergio Martino, such as The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, 1971, plus All the Colors of the Dark, and Your Vice is a Locked Room and Only I Have the Key, both 1972, and his sensibility here steers away from sensationalism towards psychological and moral collapse. Romano Scavallini, his brother, later became notorious for the abrasive cult horror Nightmare, aka Nightmare in a Damaged Brain, 1981. The measured, painterly visuals he provides here stand as a striking counterpoint to that film's infamy. Giancarlo Chiarameo's score, understated and mournful, is a strong, undersung asset that helps the film maintain its tone without tipping into melodrama. In closing, Love and Death in the Garden of the Gods sits at the gothic psychological edge of giallo, closer to a haunted confession than a slasher puzzle. Some historians decline to label it giallo at all, but its privileged decadence, unreliable testimony, and legacy of violence make the case. If you come for kills steeped with bravura, this will feel reserved. If you're drawn to atmosphere, elliptical reveals, and the slow poison of desire, it's a quiet standout in a very loud year. And those are the forgotten gialli for this episode. I hope you learned about something new here, and if you are interested in watching these movies, you can look them up online. If you do watch them or have already seen them, I invite you to leave your thoughts on them in the comments. Follow The King in Giallo on Instagram and give a like to The King in Giallo on Facebook. Subscribe here on YouTube if you aren't already, and join me every week for new giallo film content. Join The King in Giallo on Patreon for exclusive content and early access to all of my videos. Thank you very much for your continued support, and thank you especially to my patrons who support my work directly. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Sono un figlio di Satana! Sono un figlio di Satana!
No, tu sei un figlio della mignotta!